Brussels just detonated the energy lifeline of Central Europe. In one vote, 1. The EU erased every Russian gas deal by 2028. No debate, no veto. Hungary and Slovakia pleaded for delay. Brussels shut the door. Now furnaces in Slovakia are cooling mid-production, and Hungary's grid operators are calculating blackouts in real time. Bloomberg reports Europe will pay triple for American gas. And that's before the winter hits. Factories, families, and entire economies are staring at the same question. What happens when unity itself runs out of fuel? For Hungary and Slovakia, that vote was not symbolic. Both economies are locked into long-term supply contracts with Gazprom. Hungary until 2036, Slovakia until 2034, deals that guarantee cheap energy for factories and households. The Financial Times noted that those same contracts, once seen as pragmatic, would soon violate European law. It meant cutting off fuel that powers their grids, their heating, and their industries, not gradually, but within 2 winters. The official statement from Brussels called it a milestone for strategic autonomy. Eurostat data shows Hungary still relies on Russia for roughly 80% of its gas, and Slovakia about 60%. Those are not dependencies that can be unwound with paperwork. According to Bloomberg's energy desk, replacing that supply requires at least 50 billion cubic meters of new import capacity, which is, well, equivalent to the annual output of Norway's entire North Sea system. No such infrastructure yet exists in Central Europe. Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen assured reporters that solidarity mechanisms would support vulnerable states. On paper, that refers to the EU's joint gas buying platform launched in 2023. In practice, Reuters reported that only 15% of imports last year were actually purchased collectively. The rest came through national contracts at market prices. In a system designed for unity, each country is now negotiating alone. Budapest's foreign minister, Péter Szijjártó, told Hungarian state media the decision was a direct attack on national energy security. He argued that Brussels ignored both geography and economics. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico went further, calling the ban ideological nonsense and threatening to block the EU's next sanctions package unless concessions were made. Officials in Brussels responded by citing majority rule. 20 of 27 members had approved, and that was now enough. The Financial Times described the moment as a constitutional stress test disguised as energy policy. The scale of Europe's shift is honestly staggering. Before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia supplied about 45% of the EU's total gas imports. That's around 155 billion cubic meters per year, according to the International Energy Agency. By mid-2025, that share had dropped to just 12%. But, even replacing that final fraction will cost dearly. Reuters estimated the bloc now spends an extra 30 billion euros a year on higher-priced US and Qatari LNG. So energy security, in other words, comes with an invoice. Eurostat's consumer data shows energy prices across the EU remain 19% higher than before the war. In Hungary, regulated household gas tariffs have climbed a whopping 67% since 2022. Slovakia's industrial electricity costs are up 44%. Economists warn those increases feed directly into inflation and threaten manufacturing competitiveness. Germany's situation really illustrates the pressure, according to the Wall Street Journal. Its energy-intensive sectors, chemicals, steel, glass, have already cut output by more than 10% compared with 2023. Supporters inside the European Parliament insist moral necessity outweighs cost. In mid-October, Reuters reported that the Parliament's Energy Committee voted to accelerate the ban to 2027, arguing that dependency cannot coexist with sovereignty. That amendment will face a plenary vote before year-end. If passed, it compresses the transition window to just 24 months, a deadline energy engineers call technically impossible. Hungary and Slovakia's networks complicate matters further. Their pipelines were built for east-to-west flow through Ukraine and Serbia. Reverse flow capacity exists, but, it remains tiny. Reuters found Hungary's link with Austria can supply only 3 billion cubic meters annually against a national demand exceeding 10 billion. Slovakia's capacity gap is similar. If westward gas cannot physically reach them, compliance becomes theoretical. Inside the European Commission, diplomats admitted to Politico that the legal maneuver was intentional. By classifying the measure under trade policy, they avoided the unanimity rule that crippled earlier sanctions rounds. We learned from fatigue, one official said. Efficiency replaced consensus. For smaller states, that efficiency now looks like exclusion. The EU's cohesion funds add leverage. Budapest already has 21 billion euros of those funds frozen over rule of law disputes. Energy compliance could become the next condition. The Financial Times warned that blending budget control with energy enforcement transforms the EU from a cooperative bloc into a hierarchical one. The question shifts from whether Hungary will obey to how far Brussels is willing to coerce. Meanwhile, Russia has adapted. Its energy ministry reports exports to China through the power of Siberia. Pipeline rose 54% this year, while LNG sales to India jumped 39%. Bloomberg Economics calculated Moscow's fossil fuel export revenue at $210 billion in 2024, only 17% below pre-war levels. If Europe hoped to starve the Kremlin's finances, the outcome appears partial at best. The Bruegel Institute in Brussels wrote that the deeper risk now lies inside Europe itself, that fragmentation over energy could spill into defense and fiscal policy. Once qualified majority voting becomes routine on issues once requiring unanimity, smaller members lose their shield. That shift could redefine the nature of the Union as much as any economic shock. The assumption guiding Brussels is that shared sacrifice strengthens unity. But when sacrifice is uneven, solidarity fractures. Western economies can afford expensive LNG because their per capita GDP is double that of Central Europe. For Hungary and Slovakia, moral policy translates into household austerity. Public anger is growing. In Hungary's recent by-elections, the ruling Fidesz party campaigned against what it called energy imperialism and expanded its majority. In Slovakia, similar rhetoric now defines national politics. Brussels counters that renewable investment will bridge the gap. The Repower EU initiative allocates 300 billion euros to accelerate wind, solar, and hydrogen projects. Yet Bloomberg noted most of that funding consists of loans, not grants, and will take years to materialize. Gas still stabilizes the grid during winter peaks. In that sense, cutting supply faster than alternatives appear is less transformation than gamble. By 2028, the EU expects to replace every Russian molecule with imports from allies and new renewables. But American LNG contracts are indexed to Henry Hub plus shipping and regasification costs, meaning European buyers pay roughly triple the pre-war Russian pipeline price. Reuters data from September put spot LNG cargoes at $12 per MMBtu, compared with $4 for Russian gas before 2022. The price of independence, as it turns out, is arithmetic. Inflation carries political weight. Rising energy bills feed populism more efficiently than ideology. France, despite its rhetoric, quietly expanded Russian LNG imports through Dunkirk by 40% this year. The Netherlands increased purchases by 72%. Spain's utilities signed spot deals via Turkish intermediaries. Officially, those transactions remain legal until 2028, but they reveal how principle bends under pressure. Each stage of the phase-out tightens the screws. Starting in 2026, no new contracts may be signed. By 2027, short-term deals end. By 2028, the flow stops completely. Every deadline compresses negotiations and drives prices higher. The European gas storage network, even after expansion to 113 billion cubic meters, covers only a quarter of annual demand. One cold winter could unravel the timetable. Washington benefits from Europe's decision. Bloomberg reported that United States LNG exports to Europe reached 91 million tons in 2024, generating $65 billion in revenue. Energy independence for Europe therefore doubles as market dominance for America. Brussels may reduce one dependency only to deepen another. A geopolitical symmetry that, honestly, few in the EU publicly acknowledge. Inside the Berlaymont building, officials insist the union will hold. They cite unity as both strategy and narrative. But, enforcement relies increasingly on penalties, fund suspensions, and majority rules. The European project, once described as voluntary integration, now resembles centralized management. Hungary and Slovakia call that coercion. Brussels calls it progress. Winter approaches, and in Central Europe, the math is unforgiving. Infrastructure lags, reserves shrink, and construction on new interconnectors moves slower than legislation. Each announcement from Brussels lands like a countdown. The cohesion of the bloc will not be tested in press conferences, but in homes when temperatures fall below zero and bills arrive higher than before. Parliament is expected to finalize the legislation early next year. Customs officials will then monitor LNG origin certificates, regulators will audit supply contracts, and courts will impose fines for violations. Compliance, for the first time, becomes measurable in cubic meters. Europe set out to end dependency and found itself, redefining democracy. Hungary and Slovakia may comply publicly while delaying in practice, as they once did with migration quotas and judicial reforms. The legal power of the Union is formidable. Its political legitimacy is eroding. Once consensus gives way to compulsion, disintegration doesn't start with exits. It starts with chaos. Across the continent, economists calculate that replacing 12% of gas supply by 2028 means securing 45 billion cubic meters per year from new sources. That requires 4 LNG terminals, 2 pipeline extensions, and dozens of regasification units, projects whose timelines extend beyond the mandate of the current parliament. The arithmetic suggests friction, not failure, but friction is enough to change history. And as Brussels celebrates its energy independence, one statistic sits pretty. A recent Eurobarometer survey shows trust in EU institutions at 52%. The highest in 17 years. The question now is not whether Europe can live without Russian gas. It's whether Europe can live with itself after doing so. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.